Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we have finally reached the ultimate segment of Liberty Nation Radio, which we entitle Talkin Liberty. It's when we reintroduce our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, and guardian of individual liberty.
Boom.
Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Tim, guardian of liberty is, to say it's a full-time job in these days is an understatement. The threats are coming fast and furious.
COVID-19 in the courts, and it seems to me that the court's big question these days, Scott, is determining the answer to the question, to paraphrase Bill Clinton in a way, depends what the meaning of essential is, because essential businesses are the only ones that are allowed to continue conducting business in many or most of the states across the country.
Well, the numbers are changing rapidly, Tim, so I wouldn't get too married into that, except to say that they're increasing on an ongoing basis the more that people suffer under the penalty of being subject to one of these orders. And the courts are, being deluged by these types of cases.
What are we learning about how the courts are interpreting the word essential?
Well, the thing is, Tim, all of the different cases involve challenges to the particular state law that has been invoked by the various leadership, the governors, basically, to invoke it. So it means a different thing probably in every single state. And, they haven't worked it all out yet. I can tell you that broadly speaking, the courts have generally been amenable to the shutdown orders. So we've seen some pushback, and we've seen some of the orders be trimmed by the governors themselves when it seemed like they would lose, notably Delaware and Pennsylvania with respect to firearms. But the rest of it, we're going to have to wait and see it shake out, I think.
Well, there's one thing that's been declared a non-essential activity by the Raleigh, North Carolina Police Department. But this non-essential activity, Scott, is included in the Bill of Rights.
Void where prohibited by law, Tim. That was my Bill of Rights T-shirt
Right.
you commented on, I think, last week. The citizens of North Carolina, many citizens of North Carolina, which has not been devastated by COVID-19, like New York City, for instance, have protested the shutting down of the state and said, it's not appropriate for us to lose our freedoms over this threat currently in North Carolina. And part of that protest was, they just like a protest, right? Signs and so forth, protesting the order. In Raleigh, the police threatened to arrest and enforced a ban on it and said that it's a non-essential activity. Tim, the right to gather peaceably, to assemble, to petition the government for redress of grievances is absolutely perhaps one of the core reasons why the country itself was founded. And for the police in Raleigh to be willing to permit all sorts of activity, but not the very, very core of what it means to be a free person as our founders envisioned, it makes the heart ache, I think, Tim, and calls for action.
Well, that is a seeming breach of constitutional rights, but there's another one going on in D.C. where jail inmates with coronavirus have been barred from access to lawyers, their family, showers, changes of clothes, inspectors apparently have determined.
I think that I wanted to talk about this story, Tim, because I think it's an exemplar of what we see in lots of places with jail populations. And, when we as a society throw somebody in a cage, we have a special obligation to those people. And so it's even more important that those people have sort of basic human rights, and also included in those basic human rights are basic constitutional rights, including access to lawyers. Now, access to family, that's a bit rich, I think, for some folks, but the ability to wash and change your clothes and talk to your lawyer is something that every prisoner in the United States must have. Absolutely. Undebatable.
Well, good for you for bringing this forward, because inmates are the last people that anybody's worried about these days, but they have constitutional rights too, and those need to be honored as they are for everyone else, even in a time of crisis where morality is sort of a jump ball for a lot of people now.
Punishment of incarceration, Tim, is supposed to be its own uh, punishment, not adding torturous conditions on top of it.
Indeed, now Donald Trump has famously, and much to the chagrin or outrage of the left and everybody who hates him, claims total authority to override governors and forcing states to reopen just as he forced them to close. What about this issue of presidential total authority? And I'm putting that in quotations because that's how it has been referred to by the White House.
The president of the United States does not have total authority to override governors. In fact, he has zero authority to override governors. The governor's actions are, to the extent they are, they take place under the rubric of state law, not federal law. The only thing that the president could do, if, for instance, a governor enacted, for instance, like a travel restriction, and the president thought that that was a travel restriction that went against people's constitutional rights, they could, just like any other type of instance where that was true, they would sue the state and ask the courts to declare it an inappropriate action and then enforce that judgment from the federal courts. That's the mechanism that we have if the president of the United States, Tim, believes that a state government is acting in contravention of the rights of those citizens.
So this is an issue that will be hotly debated in the days and weeks ahead, maybe
Let's
months.
hope it doesn't need to be litigated.
Indeed. Now, finally, Scott, the more fallout from COVID-19, of course, at the Supreme Court, which will now hear oral arguments by telephone conference and for the first time provide real-time live audio of arguments?
Yeah, so, the court has famously, Tim, never allowed videotape of its proceedings. There are still shots from inside the chambers without people there, but the only photograph, I think, of actual oral arguments has come. It was, surreptitiously taken. So you get the usual court drawings of the old court reporter, the courtroom artist drawings of the justices at work. But because of COVID-19, and that journalists are not going to be able to be at the courthouse to record the goings on, they're going to make this audio available real time for those journalists, and then they will be able to broadcast it live. Now, how it works with the Supreme Court is if you want a journalist's credential to enter that courthouse, and I have gone to apply for that credential, you have to be a major reporter for a major news media outlet. There's only a few passes given because of the limited physical space available in that building. So those networks, we presume, will be broadcasting the proceedings.
How about the Supreme Court docket? Because of coronavirus, when we get to the fall, are they not going to be able to issue judgments on the number of cases they expected, or are a number of them going to get kicked down the road because of this coronavirus?
It's an interesting question we don't yet have an answer to. You also have to throw into that mix, Tim, that Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, certainly had to divide his time to deal with the impeachment proceedings. So we now have had a delay where arguments haven't been made before the court for some weeks. So perhaps they've been able to use that time to kind of catch up on a backlog, and maybe we'll just see going forward. I can tell you this, for all the branches of the government, to say that the Supreme Court is more well suited to operating remotely is an extreme understatement. I don't think this will affect the work of the court in a meaningful way if they don't want it to, because they do have the capacity to work around it.
Well, there's only nine. There's only 9 members of the Supreme Court as well. It'd be pretty easy to social distance yourself from 8 other people in the kind of rooms that they have in the Supreme Court, wouldn't it?
Well, yes, but as you might imagine, those people don't work by themselves. They have
Of
the
course.
support staff and so
Right.
forth. But to your point, yes, given the comparisons, exceedingly easy compared to Congress or the executive.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue, with our own Mark Angelides. All of it available on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty, and for heaven's sake, stay healthy. We'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.